Sign it, Harper. We don't have all day." Harper Bennett stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, sunlight slanting through the towering glass windows of Montgomery Tower, casting long, cold shadows. The transfer documents trembled slightly in her grip. 40 pages of betrayal, cloaked in polished legal jargon. They wanted her to give up everything. NeuroVita Technologies, the biotech empire she had built from a tiny lab into a billion-dollar leader in neuroregenerative medicine. Around her sat the people who once called her family, now nothing more than vultures in designer suits. Charles Montgomery, the patriarch, tapped his cane impatiently. Jonathan, her husband, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched like a spoiled child, waiting for his toy. Harper's voice was calm, but razor sharp. "You're insane if you think I'll hand over my life's work to bail out your crumbling empire." Charles scoffed. "You wouldn't be here without the Montgomery name. That name opened doors for you." She laughed, cold, bitter. My ideas opened those doors. My patents kept them open. NeuroVita has nothing to do with your dying real estate empire. It's me." Jonathan shot to his feet, sudden and violent. "Don't embarrass yourself, Harper," he hissed. "You've always been ungrateful. I should have walked the moment you called me an asset in front of your investors," she snapped, turning to leave. But before she could take a step, Jonathan struck her. The sound of the slap cracked through the boardroom like a gunshot. Harper's head snapped to the side. Silence fell like a curtain. No one moved. No one stopped him. Harper blinked, shocked, but unbroken. She slowly turned back to face him, one cheek flushed red. But her eyes burned with clarity, cold and merciless. "That," she said, voice trembling, not with fear, but with rage, "was your last mistake." She pulled her arm free of his grasp, looked down at the contract. Without a word, Harper began tearing it in half, then into quarters, then again, until only shreds remained. The pieces fluttered to the floor at Jonathan's feet like falling ash. "I built NeuroVita from nothing. I've saved thousands of lives. And you? You'll be remembered as the man who hit his wife because he couldn't steal her company." She turned to the rest of them. "You want a legacy? Here it is. Harper Langston just walked out of this room and took your last chance at salvation with her." Then she walked out, shoulders straight, heels echoing confidently on the marble floor. Jonathan didn't follow. He knew the war had begun, and deep down, for the first time in his life, he knew he'd already lost. The cracks began to show when Montgomery Holdings' financial empire started crumbling under the weight of bad loans, inflated assets, and a trail of luxury developments that no one could afford. Charles Montgomery, once hailed as a real estate visionary, was now fighting to keep his name off the front page of every financial scandal column in the country. But instead of cleaning up their mess, they set their sights on Harper Bennett, his daughter-in-law and CEO of NeuroVita Innovations, the biotech firm revolutionizing neuroregenerative therapy. To them, Harper wasn't family. She was a lifeline. Her company's valuation had skyrocketed after a groundbreaking clinical trial showed unprecedented recovery rates in spinal cord injury patients. Investors lined up. Hospitals begged for partnerships. NeuroVita wasn't just a company. It was hope. And to the Montgomerys, it was cash flow. They'll twist it into a strategic merger, Harper muttered to her lead scientist one night. Staring at the draft documents, her husband had slipped into her bag without asking. But let's be honest, this is theft in slow motion. Behind closed doors, deals were already in motion. Jonathan had met with private equity firms. Charles had summoned lawyers. They had all assumed Harper would comply. After all, she had married into the brand. What they failed to understand was NeuroVita wasn't a brand. It was her life's work. When the Montgomerys summoned her to that fateful board meeting, the mood was polished but poisonous. Charles tried to appeal to her sense of loyalty. Jonathan went further, reminding her who funded her first lab and who introduced her to the right people. But Harper wasn't the same young researcher desperate for a chance. She had grown into a visionary, and she wasn't about to hand over the future of neurohealing to a crumbling dynasty obsessed with profit margins. "I didn't build NeuroVita to pad some rich man's portfolio," she said, voice steady. "I built it to save lives, and no amount of guilt or threats is going to make me let you destroy that." Their smiles faded. The pressure turned to anger, and when they realized Harper wouldn't fold, they turned vicious. But what they didn't know was that Harper had already started preparing for war. Because when your own family turns into predators in suits, the only choice left is to fight back harder. Harper didn't cry when she walked out of that boardroom. She didn't scream, didn't break. She drove straight to the one place that had always grounded her, her small, cluttered apartment in the city where NeuroVita was first born. The walls still had sketches of neural pathways, faded post-its from sleepless nights, and photos of her first clinical trial volunteers. And that night, surrounded by memories of her real family, her team, her science, her purpose, Harper started planning. The next morning, she called Layla Chen, her longtime friend and corporate attorney. "They tried to force me to hand over the company," Harper said, her voice steady. "They think they can bury me in legal threats and family guilt. I want to make sure they never touch NeuroVita again." Layla didn't hesitate. "Then we hit them back harder, with facts, contracts, and every shred of dirt they've hidden." They began digging deep. What Harper uncovered made her blood run cold. Montgomery Holdings had already filed preliminary paperwork to absorb NeuroVita into one of their shell companies. They were moving fast, hoping public perception would corner Harper into compliance. Worse, Jonathan had illegally accessed her private corporate files, trying to shift patent ownership behind her back. That's when Harper realized this wasn't just betrayal, this was war. She and Layla filed for an emergency injunction, freezing all attempted asset transfers. Simultaneously, Harper issued a public statement reaffirming her position as CEO and majority shareholder of NeuroVita. But she didn't stop there. Using the firm's own internal audit reports, documents she had secretly kept over the years, Harper built a case showing Montgomery Holdings was funneling investor money into offshore accounts, propping up the illusion of solvency. She compiled evidence, interviews, and even whistleblower statements from former employees Jonathan had fired when they got too close to the truth. Then she called in every favor she had: journalists, financial regulators, industry allies. She was going to burn down the house they tried to lock her in, and she would do it publicly, legally, and with undeniable proof. The Montgomerys had tried to silence her with a pen. Harper was going to answer with a spotlight. 3 weeks later, the financial world woke up to war. Not a market dip, not a corporate rebrand, but an all-out legal and ethical bloodbath that made front-page headlines across the country. "Whistleblower exposes billion-dollar fraud at Montgomery Holdings," blared the Wall Street Journal. CNBC ran with "Montgomery Empire crumbles under federal investigation." The source behind it all, Harper Bennett, no longer the silent genius behind NeuroVita Technologies. Now, the whistleblower, the survivor, the storm. The 317-page dossier submitted to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, FBI's White-Collar Crimes Division, and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, included damning internal emails, falsified clinical trial reports, covert audio recordings, and sworn affidavits from former employees. It exposed the full extent of the Montgomery scheme. $47 million embezzled from federal and private research grants meant for neurodegenerative therapy trials, redirected into personal offshore accounts and shell LLCs in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Clinical trial data had been manipulated or outright fabricated, endangering thousands of future patients while propping up stock prices. An attempted hostile takeover of NeuroVita through coercion, blackmail, and forged shareholder agreements. At the heart of it was Jonathan Montgomery, Harper's own husband, and his father, Charles, who had built an empire on the illusion of integrity. Now, both were facing a cascade of charges: wire fraud, securities fraud, grant fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and attempted intellectual property theft, each carrying potential decades in federal prison. At a nationally broadcast press conference held in the same skyscraper where they once tried to bully her into submission, Harper stood alone behind the podium. No legal team behind her, no corporate PR fluff, just the truth. "I did not come here to destroy a family," she began, her voice steady. "I came to protect mine, NeuroVita, and every patient who trusted us with their future." She paused, letting the silence bite, then continued. "They tried to erase me, strip me of my work, silence me with money, fear, and even violence. But I will not allow corrupt corporations to use science as a smokescreen for greed." She held up a flash drive, the original encryption key to NeuroVita's patented neural recovery sequence. "This is mine. It always was. And no amount of threats, lawsuits, or slaps across the face will change that." Cameras flashed. A reporter in the front row whispered, "She's going to take them down." By the end of that day, the number sign "Stand with Harper" hashtag had gone viral. Thousands shared stories of whistleblowers, women in STEM, and startup founders bullied by powerful investors. Medical institutions pulled partnerships from Montgomery Holdings. Law firms rushed to disassociate. Investors filed a class action lawsuit. NeuroVita's board voted to reappoint Harper as CEO unanimously. Its valuation tripled overnight. Harper was invited to speak at the Global Leadership Forum in D.C., where she delivered a groundbreaking keynote titled "Innovation Without Exploitation: Protecting IP in a Predatory Market." She didn't just survive, she changed the rules. As she closed her speech, Harper quoted the words her mother once wrote in a letter taped inside her first lab notebook: "Some doors don't open because you were meant to build your own." And that's exactly what Harper did. Montgomery Holdings officially filed for bankruptcy by the end of Q3. The once prestigious buildings bearing the golden Montgomery logo were seized and sold off to cover the mountain of debt. Luxury cars, lakeside mansions, even their private jet auctioned off in broad daylight. Charles and Jonathan Montgomery were sentenced to 18 and 22 years in prison, respectively. No longer symbols of success, they became walking proof that greed always collapses under its own weight. The family fractured. Those who once flattered them, sought favors, and bowed in their presence, now erased all traces of association. But Harper didn't stop at victory. She established a business ethics foundation, using the settlement money she won from the lawsuit to create the Bennett Center for Ethical Innovation, a space dedicated to nurturing early-stage healthcare and tech startups, where innovation was protected, not exploited. The building that used to house Montgomery Holdings headquarters was transformed into a public research institute, open to students, patients, and scientists from around the world. Its new symbol, a glowing neuron, representing intelligence and courage. At the opening ceremony, simple but powerful, Harper stood before an audience of former skeptics, opponents, and those who once tried to silence her. She said, "I used to be called a troublemaker, a threat, someone who didn't know her place. But today, I stand here not for revenge, but to prove something. What we build with integrity can never be stolen." She paused, then smiled. "Montgomery tried to steal my company to save their empire. In the end, they were buried beneath the weight of their own greed. As for me, I started over, empty hands, but a heart that no longer fears." The crowd rose in a standing ovation as Harper looked up at the wall where her name was engraved beside a quote, "Innovation is a right, not a privilege." Her story was no longer one of vengeance. It was rebirth. A testament that even when you fall, even when you're betrayed, you never lose your voice if you're brave enough to reclaim it. A year later, in March, Harper stood on the balcony of the 18th floor of the Bennett Center, where the early spring breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the park below. She closed her eyes, listening to the city waking up. No honking horns, no mocking voices, no oppressive shadows of power looming over her like they did during her years with the Montgomerys. Only stillness and freedom. A message came in from Layla. Did you see this morning's article? Harper unlocked her phone. On the front page of Forbes Women, a photo of her standing in front of a glowing neuron symbol with the headline, Harper Bennett, the woman who redefined power in Silicon Valley. She smiled, not because of the fame, but because the journey had been seen, acknowledged, and no longer distorted by those who once controlled the narrative. A young assistant knocked softly. Ms. Bennett, a group of students from New Orleans is here. They've brought a new idea for AI-assisted cancer treatment. Harper nodded. Bring them up. And she knew this was the life she chose. Not revenge, not dominance, but creation. Opening doors that once were slammed shut in her face. That day, Harper met with 4 startup teams, signed a partnership with a community hospital, and replied to a 10-year-old girl dreaming of becoming an inventor. She saw herself in that girl's eyes, Harper from 10 years ago, who once believed that women could change the world. She had been right. When the sun set, she returned to her small apartment by the river. No mansions, no bodyguards, just her, and a world she had helped reshape. Harper poured a glass of white wine and stood by the wide-open window. Golden light bathed the rooftops of the city, gentle and strong, just like her. She was no longer the woman broken at a family dinner. She was the one who brought down an empire, and from its ashes, built a better, kinder world. Harper Bennett, the woman they once underestimated, now the woman they tell stories about in history books. Harper Bennett's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't found in staying silent for the sake of peace, but in standing firm for what you've built, even when it means confronting those closest to you. In a world where loyalty is often weaponized to mask greed and control, Harper shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. She didn't just fight for herself, she spoke up for founders, for women in science, for every voice that's ever been overshadowed by power. The deeper lesson here is this: never let anyone make you forget who you are, what you've created, and what you deserve. Know when to say no, even if it's difficult, because sometimes when one door slams shut, it's the very moment you step into a future where you're not just surviving the system, you're leading the change. If you enjoy deep, emotional, and meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new update. Your support is the motivation that drives us to keep bringing you powerful stories. Once again, thank you for being here, and see you in the next story.